My daughter sold my $3 million ranch behind my back, then shoved $12,000 into my hands and said, "You're old now. Go figure out where to live." I laughed out loud. And that laugh, as bitter as it sounded, was the beginning of their worst nightmare. My name is Margaret Collins, and I'm 67 years old. I've been a widow for almost a decade, living alone on the same ranch in Montana that my late husband and I poured our lives into. For 35 years, that land was my anchor. Every fence post, every acre of grass, and every sunrise over the mountains carried a memory of Robert. It was the place where we built a family, where we argued and made up, where we grew older together. After he passed, the ranch became more than just property. It was the last living piece of us. Life on the ranch was quiet but fulfilling. I spent my mornings with coffee on the porch, listening to the wind move through the cottonwoods. I kept up the garden Robert loved, and I still rode out into the fields sometimes just to feel the wide open sky above me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. That's why the betrayal cut as deeply as it did. A few days ago, Linda, my only daughter, and her husband Paul walked into my kitchen with smug little smiles, carrying an envelope like it contained good news. I opened it to find a check for $12,000. Paul puffed out his chest as if he'd just saved me from poverty and announced almost proudly that they had sold my ranch. "Your cut," he said, like it was a fair deal, like they'd done me a favor. $12,000 for 35 years of blood, sweat, and memories, for the land Robert and I built our lives on. They looked at me as though I should be grateful, as though a woman my age ought to quietly accept whatever crumbs were tossed her way. I remember staring at that piece of paper, feeling the sting of humiliation heat my face. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had reduced me to a burden to be packed away, and she didn't even flinch. She believed, truly believed, that she could strip away everything I owned and everything I cherished, and I would simply disappear into some retirement home, forgotten and docile. But what Linda and Paul didn't know is that the ranch held more than memories and soil. Beneath that land was a secret so dangerous, so explosive, that it could shake an entire network of powerful men to their core. And by selling it without my permission, they had just lit the fuse. When the shock first hit me, it felt like my chest was caving in. Anger came right after hot, sharp, and blinding. My daughter, my only child, had betrayed me in the deepest way possible, and Paul, with his slick smile and cheap cologne, strutted around like he'd just won a prize. I wanted to scream, but instead I sat there, silent, holding that check as if it might burn through my hand. Once the haze of disbelief wore off, I did what Robert always taught me. I went looking for the truth. I pulled out every file, every deed, every paper connected to the ranch. That's when I saw it, my signature on a power of attorney document I had never signed. The lines were shaky, the strokes too careful. Whoever forged it thought they were clever, but they underestimated me. I've been signing Margaret Collins for nearly 7 decades. I knew my own hand. Still, I needed someone who could help me fight. I walked into a law office downtown, sat across from a young attorney who looked like he barely had to shave, and explained the situation. He nodded politely, shuffled papers, as if he were dealing cards, and finally said, "Mrs. Collins, sometimes older folks don't remember signing things. Are you sure you didn't authorize this?" The humiliation stung worse than the betrayal. He didn't see me as a client. He saw me as a confused old woman. I stood up, thanked him for his time, and walked out before he could finish his lecture. On the drive home, I called Nancy, a friend from my old book club. She had worked as a paralegal for decades, sharp as a tack even in retirement. When I told her what happened, she practically shouted through the phone, "Margaret, that's elder fraud. You need Patricia Chen. She's the best in the state when it comes to cases like this. And don't wait another day." Nancy didn't need to remind me twice. I called Patricia's office and arranged a meeting. For the first time since that cursed envelope landed on my table, I felt like I had a fighting chance. But Patricia wasn't the only reason my heart beat with a strange kind of hope. There was something else I had never told Linda or Paul, something even Robert had urged me to keep secret. Before he died, Robert uncovered a massive web of corruption. He had spent years working for the County Planning Commission, and along the way he'd stumbled on documents, photographs, and recordings that proved officials and developers were pocketing millions while destroying protected land. Robert had been preparing to go to the FBI, but his heart gave out before he could. I couldn't bring myself to destroy the evidence. Instead, I honored his last wish. I buried everything in a waterproof metal case beneath the old oak tree on the southwest corner of our land. And now, staring at the forged papers and the smug faces of my daughter and her husband, I realized the horrifying truth: they hadn't just sold my ranch. They had sold the very ground where a bombshell of evidence lay waiting to blow powerful men's lives apart. Once Patricia confirmed that my signature had been forged, she didn't waste time. She leaned across her polished oak desk and said, "Margaret, this is bigger than a family dispute. If Robert's evidence is really buried where you say it is, you're sitting on dynamite. We need to bring in the FBI before the developers find it." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. Dynamite. That's exactly what it was. Within hours, Patricia arranged a quiet meeting with Special Agent Sarah Morrison, a woman in her 50s with the sharpest eyes I'd ever seen, and her younger partner, Mike Torres. They listened without interruption as I explained how Robert had hidden everything under the oak tree years ago. When I finished, Sarah tapped her pen against her notebook. Silver Creek Development is tied to Richard Bradley, a developer we've had on our radar for years. If he's buying this land, he's not just looking to build a resort. He's after those files. We need to retrieve them before his people do. That's how I, a 67-year-old widow, found myself volunteering for what sounded like a covert mission. The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in execution. At 2 a.m, Mike and I slipped onto the property through an old logging road Robert used to take. I wore black from head to toe, feeling ridiculous and exhilarated all at once, like an unlikely extra in a spy movie. My heart thudded so loudly I worried it would give us away. When the oak tree finally came into view, I counted my steps exactly as Robert had written in his notes. 15 paces northeast near the boulder. Mike's metal detector beeped softly, confirming what I already knew in my bones. We started to dig the cool earth, giving way under the shovels. 10 minutes later, the metallic edge of the container appeared. Relief washed over me right until headlights cut through the darkness. A pair of SUVs crawled up the dirt road, moving slow, like predators circling prey. Mike yanked me behind a cluster of rocks. We crouched low, barely breathing, as voices carried across the night air. "You sure this is the right spot?" one man asked. "GPS coordinates match," another replied. Bradley was very specific. Hearing that name made my stomach twist. Richard Bradley, the same man Robert had whispered about in his last weeks alive. The man who had built an empire on lies, bribes, and intimidation. And now his people were here, about to dig up the same ground we'd just cleared. We waited in silence, hearts pounding, until they set up equipment and began sweeping the area. By then, Mike had already closed the container and covered the hole. With every ounce of courage I had left, I followed him as we slipped away step by careful step until the night swallowed us whole again. Back in the safety of Sarah's office the next morning, I laid eyes on Robert's files for the first time in years. Photographs of envelopes exchanged under tables, audio recordings of bribes being discussed, bank ledgers that named names. My hands trembled, equal parts grief and triumph. Robert's work had survived, but victory didn't last long. 2 days later, Richard Bradley himself requested a private meeting with me. He wasn't the kind of man who wasted words. Over lunch in a dimly lit restaurant, he leaned close and whispered, "Mrs. Collins, I'll give you $2 million for the exact location of what your husband buried. If you don't cooperate, I can't promise your daughter and son-in-law won't pay the price for misleading me." The blood drained from my face. It wasn't just my land or my pride anymore. Bradley was threatening Linda and Paul, dangling their lives in exchange for Robert's secrets. It should have been easy to wash my hands of them after what they'd done to me, but hearing his threat cracked something inside me. Linda was still my daughter, no matter how blind and reckless. I could forgive a lot, but I could never stomach the idea of her being a pawn in Bradley's game. When I told Sarah what Bradley had said, she didn't flinch. "We'll set a trap. Let him believe you've discovered a second map, another location, where Robert may have hidden evidence. We'll wire you, surround the area, and catch him in the act." The night of the sting, I handed Bradley a folded sheet marked with fake coordinates. His eyes glittered as he studied it. "Robert always was paranoid, wasn't he?" he murmured. He signaled his men to prepare the excavation. And then, in a heartbeat, the quiet night exploded with shouts. "FBI, nobody move." Floodlights blazed. Armed agents swarmed the site. Bradley's men dropped their tools immediately, but Bradley himself stood frozen lips curling into a cold smile as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. "You think I'm the top of the ladder?" he said softly, almost amused. "Mrs. Collins, you're about to learn just how wrong you are." His words sent a chill through me that no floodlight could chase away. The news spread like wildfire. Richard Bradley had been arrested, and within days a cascade of indictments followed. County commissioners, city planners, even a federal judge were suddenly in the spotlight for taking bribes and approving illegal projects. It felt like watching a rotten tree finally crack and fall, exposing every insect that had been eating it from the inside out. But the scandal didn't stop with the powerful men in suits. Linda and Paul were arrested, too, charged with forgery, fraud, and elder abuse. My daughter led out of her own house in handcuffs, her head down her face, pale. I thought losing the ranch was the worst pain she could inflict on me. Seeing her name on the evening news proved me wrong. The FBI's deep dive into Robert's files uncovered something even uglier. Paul wasn't a bystander tricked by greed. He had been an active participant for years. His construction company had profited from illegal land developments, cutting corners and lining pockets. Suddenly, everything made sense. His eagerness to sell the ranch, his smug expression when he handed me that insulting check. Paul had been part of the network all along. Linda, on the other hand, broke down. I visited her once in holding. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, makeup gone, eyes red and swollen. She clutched the bars and whispered, "Mom, please forgive me. We never meant for it to go this far." My heart ached, but I couldn't give her what she wanted. "Linda?" I said quietly. "Forgiveness doesn't come from words. It comes from what you do after this. Show me through your actions, and maybe one day I'll believe you." Just when I thought I couldn't take another revelation, Agent Sarah called me back to her office. She slid a folder across the table. "Margaret," she said softly, "Robert didn't die of natural causes. He was poisoned with digitalis, and we know who ordered it, Judge Harrison Wickham." The room tilted around me. My husband's death, which I'd mourned as cruel fate, had been murder. I remembered that night too clearly, Robert excited about turning his evidence over the next day, Wickham stopping by under the guise of preparing testimony, me serving coffee before heading to bed. By morning, Robert was gone. My stomach turned cold as I realized I had unknowingly poured the cup that killed him. But justice finally caught up. With Bradley's arrest, with Robert's evidence, the FBI dismantled the entire network. Wickham, his cronies, and a dozen other officials were taken down in a single sweep. What they'd built on corruption collapsed in weeks. As I watched the trials unfold, I thought about the women who would hear my story. Too many of us over 45 are treated as though our voices don't matter, as though we're supposed to shrink into silence. My message is simple: silence is exactly what predators and manipulators count on. We can't give it to them. Robert's life was stolen, my dignity nearly stripped, and Linda nearly lost her future. But the truth still rose. Justice, though late, came all the same. In the end, the ranch was returned to me. But instead of holding on to it like a trophy, I chose to let it serve a higher purpose. I donated the land to the state as a protected nature preserve. With one condition: a memorial garden would be built in Robert's honor, and for all the other lives damaged or lost to the corruption he fought to expose. Standing there at the dedication, watching the sun dip low and paint the Montana sky gold, I felt lighter than I had in 7 years. The shadows that once haunted me seemed to finally lift. Looking back, I know this family doesn't give anyone the right to exploit you. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. And age doesn't make us powerless. Sometimes it gives us the clarity and courage to change everything. I used to believe my best years were behind me, but this journey proved that strength can rise at any stage of life. So if you're listening and you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or used, remember this: you are not invisible and you are not alone. Your voice, your choices, and your dignity still matter. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it resonates with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow Real Her Stories like this video and pass it on, because every woman deserves to know she's worthy of love, respect, and the power to stand her ground.